Good morning and welcome to today's pre-launch news conference for the launch of NASA's next tracking and data relay satellite, the TDRS-M spacecraft, which will launch on top of a United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket. I'm Katherine Hambleton from NASA's Office of Communications. The Atlas V rocket is ready to lift off tomorrow morning at 8:03 a.m. Eastern Time during a 40-minute window from Space Launch Complex 41 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station here in Florida. Joining me here at Kennedy Space Center today to talk about the mission and how preparations for tomorrow's launch are progressing are Tim Dunn, Launch Director at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, Badri Yunus, Deputy Associate Administrator for Space Communications and Navigation at NASA headquarters in Washington, Dave Littman, Project Manager for TDRS-M at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, James Wilson III, Boeing Program Manager for NASA Civil Space Programs, Scott Messer, ULA Program Manager for NASA Missions, and Clay Flynn, Launch Weather Officer with the 45th Space Wing at Cape Canaveral. After opening comments, we'll take your questions. For those on the phone, please press *1 at any time to be entered into the queue for questions. Tim, would you start us off?
Thank you, Catherine. Well, welcome and good morning. I'm proud to be here today representing the women and men of NASA's Launch Services Program, and I'm thrilled to be the launch director for the TDRS-M mission. Working alongside our United Launch Alliance colleagues, the engineers and analysts of NASA LSP take great pride in launching the next satellite in the TDRS constellation. NASA has a terrific record flying on Atlas V. We've successfully launched 14 missions on this magnificent rocket. Missions to Pluto, Jupiter, the Moon, the Sun, the radiation belts, 3 spacecraft to Mars, the asteroid Bennu, as well as 2 previous TDRS spacecraft. TDRS-M will be the 15th NASA mission on Atlas V and the 72nd Atlas V mission overall. TDRS-M will launch on an Atlas V 401 configuration vehicle from Space Launch Complex 41, affectionately known as Slick 41. That launch pad has hosted 58 Atlas V launches to date. Now I'd like to show a video with some great shots of the spacecraft, as well as the ULA crew receiving and assembling the Atlas V launch vehicle and mating the TDRS-M spacecraft at Complex 41. Please roll the tape. Okay, here we are just under 2 months ago with the arrival of the TDRS-M spacecraft over at the Space Coast Regional Airport in Titusville. The satellite was flown from California on this Air Force C-17 aircraft. And from the runway here, it's just a short drive over to Astrotech facility, the spacecraft payload processing. Here you see the arrival a few days later down at Port Canaveral of the Atlas V first stage booster as well as the second stage Centaur. These Atlas V stages are manufactured at ULA's factory in Decatur, Alabama and transported to the Cape via the Mariner ship. Here you see the first stage offloaded and transported over to the ASOC. Back over at Astrotech in Titusville, you get a glamour shot here of TDRS-M in the processing bay. And then after about 2 weeks of processing on the first stage at the ASOC, we rolled out the first stage Atlas V booster and did what we call LVOS, launch vehicle on stand, putting it onto the mobile launch platform in the vertical integration facility. The next day, we roll out with the integrated second stage, the OVI we call it, take it out to the VIF and mate it to the top of the first stage. You see the ULA crew here working very carefully. Back at Astrotech, another great shot of the final encapsulation sequence of the TDRS-M spacecraft, getting it ready to take out to the VIF for mate to the rocket. And there we are just last week on the 9th of August, raising and mating the encapsulated assembly of the spacecraft to the top of the Atlas V rocket. Really great work by the entire team to get us to that point. Well, the TDRS-M launch campaign has been exciting. We encountered an incident during processing over at Astrotech that delayed us. We had planned on launching around the first part of August, and I want to say that the team did an incredible job to get us back on track after that. I would like to point out in particular the Air Force working with the range here at the Eastern Range, as well as United Launch Alliance working their manifest, were able to fit us back into a very busy range schedule during the month of August. So it's really great within our launch community when we can all come together and help each other out. So I would like to reach out to our colleagues over at SpaceX, as well as the folks that are working the Minotaur 4 launch, because earlier this week there was a SpaceX launch, and later next week there will be a Minotaur 4 ORS-5 launch from the Cape. Both missions really did some accommodation to fit us in to enable an opportunity for us to launch tomorrow. So in the past week, since we did spacecraft mate, the Atlas V team has been busy with a lot of launch preps. Last Friday, we performed the integrated systems test between the spacecraft and rocket, and the combined NASA and ULA launch team held our flight readiness review, where we assessed all processing and pre-launch preps for the mission. Earlier this week, on Tuesday morning, we conducted the launch readiness review for the mission. Senior managers from NASA KSC, NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, NASA headquarters, as well as United Launch Alliance and the Air Force assessed all phases of the mission to enable us to proceed with launch tomorrow. On Tuesday afternoon, we did our mission dress rehearsal. We exercised and prepared the entire team for launch. Yesterday, we began our final launch preps at 9 a.m. Eastern Time when we rolled the Atlas V on its mobile launch platform out of the VIF about a quarter mile to the north to the launch pad. And then the crew deftly navigated local thunderstorm activity and safely loaded approximately 26,000 gallons of RP-1 fuel on the first stage. If you were here in the local area yesterday, you know what that activity was all about. Later tonight, the launch crew will begin arriving on console and begin with the power-on sequence for the spacecraft. The crew will then perform final preps for the Atlas V power-on and electrical checks beginning about 1 a.m. early tomorrow morning. This will be followed around 5:30 a.m. by loading of the super cold cryogenic propellants on board Atlas V. We'll start with the liquid oxidizer, liquid oxygen into the tanks of the first and second stages, and then we'll begin loading the fuel, the liquid hydrogen, into the second stage Centaur. Final flight control tests will be performed along with final tests with Eastern Range instrumentation, and then we'll be ready for launch tomorrow morning at 8:03 a.m. Eastern Time with a 40-minute window. To summarize, the spacecraft, the Atlas V rocket, and all range equipment are ready, and the combined government and contractor launch team is prepared to launch TDRS-M, a critical national asset for space communications. Back to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Tim. And next, Badri Yunus will tell us a bit about the Space Network.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Tim. We are counting on you.
Thank you.
Hopefully, by this time tomorrow, we'll all be celebrating the successful launch of TDRS-M, the new addition to the SCAN family. SCAN is the headquarter program that's responsible for all of NASA's space communication and navigation. Within SCAN, we manage all of NASA's space communication networks that include the Deep Space Network, the Near Earth Network, as well as the Space Network. They all cater to different kind of users. The Deep Space Network supports missions that are billions of miles away, sending very faint signals to Earth and giving us some data about the universe and primarily scientific data. The Near Earth Network is a little bit more robust, supporting anything between Earth and the Moon and a little bit beyond, supporting primarily missions that do not require global coverage or near real-time support. The Space Network is the youngest of all networks, and it has two components, the ground infrastructure and a fleet of data relaying satellite, of which TDRS-M is going to be a member of this family. So TDRS-M is going to be critical to our future operation and the future of the space network. Next chart. I would like you to see some charts about the history of launching the TDRS spacecraft and where we are in terms of fleet capacity. Okay, here you go. We have 3 generations of spacecraft that are somehow different in their functional performance, but architecturally they are the same. Launched since the early 1980 with the first generation TDRSs, and they have been operating for more than 20 years. Some of them are retired, some are sitting in storage, having limited capability, and all of them have been launched, by the year 1995. The second generation TDRSs, they have been launched also on an Atlas launch vehicle at Atlas 2A, and they are still operating and operating pretty robustly, and they are already active, providing active support to NASA Space Network customer community. The last of the TDRS generation is the 3rd generation, of which TDRS-M is a member, and we are hoping it will be launched successfully and will be deployed and will take its place among the stars, supporting its brothers and sisters in performing their function. It's critical because the space network, as you see in the middle of that chart, depends on TDRS to do its function. We need at least 6 spacecraft, 6 active spacecraft and 1 active spare. So we need 7 spacecraft to be ready to meet all of our mission requirements. We have most of the first generation will have been retired and sent to a supersync orbit where we retire our spacecraft, and we may have some residual capability. So TDRS-M is so critical. Without any undue pressure, Tim, I definitely need this spacecraft.
That's no pressure.
And while we are deploying TDRS-M, we are already working, next chart please, on the next generation architectural capability, the next generation communication networks, and in particular, the next generation data relaying capability. Over the past few years, NASA has been investing very heavily in transformational technology, such as optical communication, quantum entanglement, smart radios and cognitive radios, as well as robust communication systems. We are working toward an architecture where we have more robustness and where the users and the are communicating robustly through a data relay satellite or sending their data directly to their mission operations center, but having the flexibility to go anywhere where you have a channel available and to provide them optimum support. We are working with other government entities to build similar capabilities and will build into the same standards, as well as we are working with the commercial sector to adopt these standards and to adopt the technology to provide seamless interoperable environment to our users in the future. NASA is working very heavily to this endeavor, and we have declared the next decade to be the decade of light, as we intend to light up the communication highways all over the solar system. So next chart. Much of the data you can see at our website that I provide for you to please visit and see the wonderful things we are doing, as well as the technology advances we made. And next chart, please. Last but not least, I'd like to thank Tim and the entire launch services folks, to include ULA and the LSP, and as well as the spacecraft folks, from our project office, the TDRS project office, and the Boeing, for a wonderful job they have done. We are keeping our fingers crossed, but great folks, and thousands of hours, have gone into it to get us where we are now tomorrow. We expect it to be a successful day, and we are going to have a major celebration by the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, Dave Littman will tell us more about TDRS itself.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Tim and Badri. It's really great to be here again, back down at the Cape for another launch of TDRS. We were here a couple of years ago for the launch of TDRS K and L, as Badri mentioned, 2013, 2014, so it's been a couple of years, but those were great launches. They are operating very well in the space network. We did look at the telemetry coverage planned for the launch tomorrow, and TDRS K and TDRS L will be watching TDRS M and tracking the launch vehicle as for our successful launch. And so we kind of made a comment at the flight readiness review about what TDRS-M might think of that, knowing that its two siblings were going to watch over seeing it come up on the launch vehicle. So that generated a little smile across the team. But it's great that we've got two great spacecraft, K and L, and we're looking forward to the third one tomorrow. The first 7 TDRS, as Badri mentioned, were launched on the Space Shuttle program, which has been retired. We've retired at least 2 of the first 7. We still have a number of those, though, that are still operating well beyond design life. In addition, TDRS HI and J was the second generation built by the Boeing company, and those are operating, as Badri mentioned. And TDRS K and L, I just mentioned, were launched 2013 and 14, also built by the Boeing company, and those are operating very well in addition to that. So we have a great constellation, but we need one more, at least for now. Badri's got plans, as he mentioned, to maybe change paradigm of technology and to continue our communications, and increase the data rates and increase the number of users and bandwidth and discoveries that are enabled by the space communication that we have. So what I do have is a little bit of video on the processing of our spacecraft here at Astrotech. Some of it there may be a little bit of an overlay here, but this is the spacecraft arriving, as Tim mentioned here, June 23rd, and it's taken off the spacecraft, put on a land-all trailer, and taken over to Astrotech, where we process the spacecraft. It's in this container, it's shipped, and I think what you'll see here is them lifting the cover off of the transport container, and the spacecraft is shipped, and it's horizontal. It's on a strong back. From there we raise it to a vertical position, and where we put it onto our fueling stand, and that is where our processing takes place. You'll see this here. We did encounter one issue here, which we worked through, and following getting through that activity that Tim mentioned, we were ready to kind of move to a transport condition, and you can see the encapsulation here. You saw that a little bit on this on Tim's video. What folks will tell me, though, is the engineers that have spent years and thousands of hours building the spacecraft, this is the last time they physically are able to see it. The next time we will see it is on orbit through our displays in mission control. This is the spacecraft, and it's in an encapsulated state, and then it's being lifted up here on a crane and put onto the transport vehicle, where it is taken to the VIF, and that you saw Tim showed them the lift and mate. Once we launch, we have a second little video to come up here. Once we separate from the Atlas vehicle, we go through a series of orbit raising activities. Here we can see that we're spinning about 5 RPMs per second, and then we're released. And the first thing we do is we unfurl our antennas, and then we raise our orbit. We have 5 apogee burns where we raise our orbit to geosynchronous orbit. And once we are raised, then we start our deployments. And here's our north solar wing. Then we deploy our SA antennas, the large reflectors. From there, we deploy our south solar wing. And then out come our Omni antenna and the space-to-ground link antenna. From there, we have a full spacecraft, and it takes about 3 to 4 months following deployments for us to fully characterize the spacecraft and to show that it will meet mission requirements and provide the RF performance that is needed to support our users. That activity is done over at the White Sands complex, and then after acceptance of the spacecraft from the Boeing company, then it is turned over to our sister organization, the Space Network, to operate the vehicle. It becomes a member of our constellation.
Thank you. Next, James Wilson III will talk a little bit about Boeing's role in the TDRS.
Thanks, Catherine. It is truly an honor to be here representing the Boeing Company and the TDRS team. There are thousands of people behind me who have supported this program to bring us to this point. You know, it's really exciting to be up here as part of this panel, see the teamwork of folks, our partnership with NASA, partnership with ULA, that really brings this incredible sense of pride in our national asset, pride in what we're doing, and it really brings smiles to our faces when we get together and talk about the things that we do. It really brings everyone excitement. It's a long time getting here. Once the contract is signed, we go through an extensive design period. We integrate the satellite, we test it, and then bring it to launch site. But we're not done. As Dave showed in the previous video, there's several months of on-orbit test. And so there's quite a bit of activity that will follow launch. It's an exciting time for us to go through this activity. But there's an entire mission team awaiting to catch that satellite somewhere over India and take it on the rest of its way to its final orbit. This is the sixth satellite that Boeing has delivered to NASA for TDRS. And we've been the exclusive provider of TDRS satellites since 1995. That is an incredible feat. Boeing has enjoyed the relationship with NASA, and the continued relationship, I think, will be good for both entities. It's important to know, though, that TDRS-M, this satellite, represents the last of our 601 fleet. The 601s were first launched in 1992, and now here in 2017 we launched the last one. I started out on 601s when I was a young engineer. We'll see some pictures in high bay, and it's incredibly exciting for me as an engineer, now as a manager, to have gone through that and see the final launch. As I said, we have an excellent team in place with NASA and ULA, and we look forward to continuing our relationship with you guys. Now, I also have a video, and we can take a look at what it looks like to build and test satellites in our factory. So you roll the tape. So here we're going to go through a little bit of a high bay tours, which we call the factory, and walk you through some of the things that TDRS has gone through. So here we are, we're sitting on the end of an end bell, and the satellite is prepped for spacecraft thermal vac. We put it in a very large chamber. You can see it being lifted up there. And in this chamber, we simulate the space environment. We pump down to a vacuum. We heat it. We cool it. We make sure that the spacecraft systems can preserve itself. And then we go over to vibration. And vibration, we simulate what it's like to ride on the rocket. And you can see in the video that the antennas are shaking pretty good there. We simulate all the different axes that the spacecraft will see and make sure that it's structurally sound and ready to go into flight. We put it on what we call a rollover fixture, and it sits on some air pads and it allows us to move it around in the factory. And we do our deployments, and we simulate the exercise, all the appendages that will come out in flight, like Dave showed in the previous video. And then, of course, once it's all buttoned up, we put it on its adapter and attach the clamp band, and then put it in the container. And so here you see us rolling into the containerization room. It takes quite a bit of people to watch all the pieces, make sure we go through the doors properly, and make sure that we lift it properly. And so here we are lifting the spacecraft from its four corners, and they'll move it onto the container and again reattach it. And you can see the guys very carefully making sure that we're perfectly precise in our attachment and making sure that we have all the proper torques. And then we roll it over and secure it for transport to the launch site. For extra safe measure, we put a Mylar cover over it to make sure that there's no dust or condensation that could perhaps get on the spacecraft. And then we put a very heavy cover on the top of the container. And you can see the guys there being very careful to make sure that we align it properly before bringing it down. Attach the clamps, and we are ready to go on a trailer. So we roll the semi-truck in, lift it up, and hopefully you're getting a sense of how big this is. This is quite a large device, and I can imagine what the people are thinking on the freeway as they see it roll down the road. What could possibly be in that thing? Little do they know it is a beautiful spacecraft ready for launch. So, you know, it's just an incredible time for us. It's a brief moment of launch that we see this bright flame in the sky. But you know, for me, this is a very exciting time to know that, you know, I started off on 601s. I remember walking through the high bay and getting my first tour on my interview, and I asked the guy that was walking me through, "What am I going to do every day?" And he pointed to a guy that was standing in the middle of a satellite with just his legs showing. He said, "You're going to do that every day." And that's an incredible thing when you think about coming up and you work hard to get through college and school, and then you get the opportunity to do such a very, very cool thing. And now here we are at launch, getting to see all these complex machines come together to put this asset in space, and then hand it over to our customer with, you know, a feeling of a job well done. So we're looking forward to a great mission. Go Atlas. Go TDRS-M.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from James Wilson III to talk a little bit about launch preparations for Atlas and what to expect during launch.
Well, if you want me to
Scott
do it
Messer,
again,
sorry. I'm sorry about that. To Scott Messer from ULA.
Good morning. On behalf of United Launch Alliance, I'd like to welcome everyone to the TDRS-M launch tomorrow. It's a thrill for me personally to be here. Just one day away from this launch of this great TDRS satellite, which is a critical asset for the United States of America and all of space. As Tim mentioned, we have rolled the vehicle out to the pad yesterday and completed all of our closeout preparations. So at the moment, the vehicle is just sitting over there waiting for us to get there this evening and begin the processing. This will be the 72nd launch of an Atlas V vehicle for the United Launch Alliance. And of those 72 vehicles, 37 have been the 401 configuration. So 401 configuration has definitely been the workhorse of the Atlas family, is delivering a little over half of the Atlas missions to date. So the 401 is got several components. It's first of all, it's a 4-meter fairing which houses the TDRS spacecraft. It is powered by the first stage, which has an RD Amros RD-180 engine, and then the second stage, the Centaur second stage, which is powered by a Aerojet Rocketdyne RL-10C engine. This vehicle, performance-wise, does not require any strap-on boosters. The Atlas vehicle is very flexible in that way to match just the right vehicle with the performance needs of the spacecraft. So with that, we'll take a minute and see a video that will show the actual flight profile that we expect tomorrow.
The following profile details the important events of this mission using approximate times.
2, we have ignition and we have liftoff of the United...
The Atlas V RD-180 main engine ignites to lift the vehicle away from the pad. Shortly after liftoff, Atlas begins its initial pitch, yaw, and roll maneuvers to attain the proper ascent profile and minimize aerodynamic loads. The Atlas V reaches Mach 1, the speed of sound, at 80 seconds. At 92 seconds, the vehicle experiences maximum dynamic pressure. Approaching booster engine cutoff, the Atlas V is burning propellant at a rate of 1,600 pounds per second, traveling at over 11,000 miles per hour, and located 61 miles in altitude and 148 miles downrange. Booster engine cutoff occurs 4 minutes, 2 seconds after liftoff. The booster stage is jettisoned 6 seconds later. 10 seconds after booster separation, the first Centaur main engine start takes place. The payload fairing is jettisoned 8 seconds later. The vehicle now weighs just 8% of what it did at liftoff 4.5 minutes earlier. Cutoff of the Centaur main engine occurs nearly 18 minutes after launch. The mission now enters a 1.5-hour coast phase. At just over 1 hour, 48 minutes, the Centaur main engine is restarted. This burn will last less than a minute. Following the second Centaur main engine cutoff, at 1 hour 49 seconds, the mission enters a nearly 4-minute coast phase in preparation for spacecraft separation. At approximately 1 hour 53 minutes, Centaur releases NASA's TDRS-M satellite.
Thank you. So this will be the 5th launch for United Launch Alliance in 2017, and the 120th successful launch since the company was formed in 2006. I do want to say that United Launch Alliance, we are honored to deliver this basic agency capability. We're excited because, as mentioned, it enables our missions as well. The TDRS spacecraft up there, all 6 of them, or 7 of them, I guess, monitor the Atlas vehicle and our telemetry. And so it's exciting for us to launch something that will actually enable our missions. I will tell you our team is laser focused on mission success and reliability. United Launch Alliance, we pride ourselves on making sure that every mission is successful. We treat every mission as a unique satellite and a unique mission. But we also recognize that our success is because of our partnerships with NASA and spacecraft partners like Boeing. And so just want to get a thanks out there to the NASA team and the Boeing team for working with us to get to this point. We look forward to tomorrow to maintaining our 100% mission success record and continuing our unmatched reliability. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Clay to tell us what weather looks like tomorrow. So, Clay?
Thank you very much, sir. The weather is favorable for tomorrow's count. The high-pressure axis is suppressed to the south. What that'll do for us is give us westerly flow. Generally, during the summer months, westerly flow is favorable, as any type of nocturnal showers that develop over the Atlantic should tend to stay out to the east. So really, we probably will see some showers and maybe an isolated thunderstorm or 2 out to the east. I'll show you a satellite picture here momentarily. But again, I believe they will stay to the east given the westerly flow. That high-pressure axis lifts a little bit to the north over the next 24 hours. What that'll do for us is really collapse our winds. Our winds will be relatively light during the overnight hours. We should be out of the south to southwest as we're on during the count. By the time we get to near T0, we should be gusting, or out of the southwest, gusting to about 12 knots. That's well below the liftoff constraint, so really pretty favorable conditions during the overnight hours. If I could have the satellite picture brought up, please. As I was mentioning, if you look out to the east of the peninsula, there is a surface feature, a surface trough there, and you can see the clouds and showers, and there are some isolated thunderstorms out there. That feature should stay in that general vicinity over the next 24 hours, but again, with our westerly flow, would expect to see the showers and the storms remaining to our east. The system that you see to the west there, approaching Louisiana, will migrate to the east, but for the most part, that's going to stay to our north and with broad surface troughing to our north. So really not going to be a player for us Friday or Saturday. More significant, which is really going to be our principal concern for launch during the count tomorrow and as we're in the window, is the northeasterly flow. We're northeasterly above 15,000 feet or so, and it looks like we should get an influx of moisture in the mid and upper levels. So with that influx of moisture, the principal concern would just be an increase in thick clouds as they migrate in. Now, there's really not a high threat of that. It's about a 20% likelihood. So as I mentioned, it looks pretty favorable for tomorrow. We just have to monitor those thick clouds and see if they exceed criteria, but expecting them to stay below criteria. So if I could have the next slide, please. The forecast for tomorrow, we'd just be looking for a few clouds at 3,000 feet, scatter deck at 22,000 feet, and that's really the deck that we'd be concerned about, between 0 and minus 20 degrees Celsius, with another broken deck about 32,000 feet or so. Should have good visibility. It's going to be warm. Temperature should be about 80 to 81 when we hit liftoff tomorrow, with a 20% chance of violation. And as I mentioned, that's the thick cloud rule violation we'd be concerned with that we'll be monitoring. Next slide, please. Should we delay for a 24-hour delay? Conditions look fairly similar to Saturday that they do to Friday, so really similar conditions, about 20% chance of violation. Again, that would be thick cloud layer concern. Our winds will be a little more southerly. As that high pressure axis lifts to the north, our winds should go a little more southerly from the south-southwest, from about 200 degrees, but still relatively light, well below any liftoff constraints, gusting to about 10 to 12 knots. So as in summary, then, the weather looks fairly favorable for tomorrow, and should we be on the pad for a 24-hour delay, looks favorable as well. Catherine?
Thank you. We'll now open it up for questions for those in the room and those on the phone. If you're on the phone, please press *1 to be entered into the queue. When the mic comes to you, please state your name and affiliation and to whom your question is directed. Start over here.
Hello, this is Marcia Dunn of the Associated Press. I'm not sure who to address this to, but could you explain how the antenna on the spacecraft ended up broken? And I know there was an investigation. What did that conclude?
I'm happy to take that. Yes, the antenna was damaged by bumping up against a piece of ground support equipment. The antenna has been removed, replaced, and retested functioning nominally.
What ground equipment was it? Was it a crane or how? Could you give a few more details of exactly what happened?
Yes, it was prepping to lift the satellite, and the crane did come down and touch it.
And lastly, is the investigation ongoing, or has that been concluded?
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, we've concluded all the investigation for TDRS. All the incident has been contained. Our review board has met and completed all its activity and closed the issue.
Thank you. We'll take a...
One quick TDRS question. So is it for sure there will be no TDRS-N? That's sort of what it sounds like. Or is it maybe, or how does that?
There were two options. The contract was for two spacecraft, TDRS-K, TDRS-L. There were options for M and N. The M option obviously was exercised, which is why we're here today. The N option was not exercised.
Well, the deployment of satellites depends on the requirements. At this moment, there is no need for a TDRS-N, but we are seeing a need for additional data relaying capability around the 2025 timeframe. So we have time to insert the transformational technology I talked about and proceed with a new sets of capabilities, doing the same role that the TDRS is doing, which is tracking and data relaying capability, but in a more robust way.
We'll go over there.
Bill Harwood, CBS News. Just to follow up on Marcia's question for Mr. Wilson, was the antenna actually broken, or was this just a matter of being extra cautious because it got nudged and you were just playing it safe, or was there a physical defect in the antenna? And I'm assuming this is human error.
Yeah, there was no defect in the antenna. The antenna was delivered.
No, I mean after it was bumped. Was there something wrong with it or not? That's what
Yeah, there was a protective cap that was damaged. So there was some minor damage to the antenna, but that antenna was completely replaced and retested.
And human error, is that, or was there a machine malfunction in the lift?
We have very strict process control at Boeing. And so we looked at our processes and made sure that the processes were revisited and enhanced to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again.
If that's not what I asked, I mean, was it human error or was there a machine problem?
There was no machine problem.
Okay, thanks. And for Audrey, just a real quick one. How many TDRS satellites are currently actually relaying data? I'm confused in terms of the ones that are partially operable versus fully operable.
Yeah, we definitely have approximately 7 spacecraft that are active. 6 are providing real-time support to our customers, and 1 is a hot spare, on a standby.
Next, we'll take a question from the phone. Irene Klotz, your mic is open.
Thanks very much. Just to follow up for a minute, what do you mean by approximately 7, and how old is the oldest one that's currently in the operational system? Thanks.
I probably didn't get all of the questions. The sound was not coming clear.
Irene, can you repeat the first part of your question, please?
Yep. Is this better?
Yes.
Thanks. I wanted to know what you meant by approximately 7, and how old is the oldest satellite that's in the operational system?
Well, all the satellites they are part of the first generation tracking and data relay satellite systems, and they are as old as, they were launched in 1993 and 1995. When I talk approximately, not all of the first generation satellites are operating completely. They have lost some of their capabilities. So when we talk about approximately, we look at the residual capability of one mated with residual capability of the other to give us an equivalent one data relay satellite capability. So we need 7 because we need 2 spacecraft per node. We have 3 nodes up in space spanning the globe. TDRS provide the global support to anything that's flying below the geosynchronous orbit.
Thank you.
Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. And I had a question also about the damage to the TDRS antenna. What was the cost of a new antenna, and who is paying for that?
I'm going to defer contractual issues to NASA.
So I think with respect to the antenna, there was an available antenna that was identified by Boeing to be available, that was brought over and evaluated, and that it was suitable for the mission. As James has mentioned, the damaged antenna was removed and replaced. And they're basically repairing it. They have repaired it and returned the spacecraft to be ready for flight, ready for launch. And it's kind of, it's Boeing spacecraft until the government accepts it. Following on our on-orbit acceptance testing that I mentioned takes about 3 or 4 months, as James mentioned, that we do with our White Sands complex in New Mexico. Boeing brings a team out to the White Sands complex, and we check out the performance of the satellite there, and then have an on-orbit acceptance review, approximately 4 months following the launch.
So Boeing is providing the spare replacement antenna, and you don't expect an additional cost to NASA. Is that right?
Yes. The contractual terms, we're not. I won't go into the details here, but in terms of it's all being handled under the contract, and the government's cost and outlay is identified there, and there's not anything that I would kind of identify as an addition here.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. We'll come back to you questions here in the room. A question in the back there.
Hi, Emery Kelly with Florida Today. James, I think both of these might be for you. In regards to the antenna, what does that antenna do? And is there a specific date in mind for when you would like this active?
When I would like the antenna active?
Or the whole satellite ready to go?
Okay. Great. Well, really good question. What does the antenna do that was damaged? It actually has a pretty short lifespan for its nominal use. This is an omnidirectional antenna that provides hemispherical coverage for the forward part of the spacecraft. So when the spacecraft is in what we call transfer orbit, let me define what transfer orbit is. After the rocket drops us off, like I said, over India, it's on a path to get to GEO, but it's not there yet. If we left it alone, it wouldn't get to GEO by itself. And so we do what's called a transfer orbit, and we use a 100-pound engine that's on the base of the satellite to orbit raise up to geosynchronous orbit. All right, so during that time, it's about 8 days that we're doing these burns. So during this time, the satellite is not pointed at the Earth at all times. And a lot of the times when we're doing our burns, it's pointed orthogonal to the Earth. And so during that time, the antenna is able to broadcast toward the Earth. And we're able to receive the telemetry on the ground, send up our commands, and do its job. And so really, it has somewhat of a short lifespan. If for some reason the satellite had some trouble during its nominal time when the spacecraft is pointed at the Earth, That antenna is a backup for us to be able to communicate with it in case the satellite got into an orientation that was not predictable. And we have two of these antennas. There's actually one on the aft part of the spacecraft and one on the forward. So we have nearly 4 pi coverage, nearly spherical coverage where we can get commands into the spacecraft and get telemetry out so we can effectively communicate with the satellite. That hit it? Great.
Thank you. We'll go up here in the front now.
Hi, Ken Kramer, Universe Today, Northeast Astronomy Forum. A couple of questions. One, quick for Tim Dunn. First of all of you, good luck tomorrow. Can you tell us what's the scrub possibilities if we don't launch on the 18th and 19th? What is it beyond that? And for the NASA gentleman, talk about the capabilities you want to develop in the future with the laser communication. What is it going to get us that we don't have now, and why do we need it? Thank you. And the breadth of satellites that you're currently serving with TDRS. Tell us about that. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Ken. You could tell I was kind of lonesome down here because James and Dave were taking all the questions. We obviously have tomorrow as our first attempt secured on the range, as well as a backup opportunity on Saturday the 19th. As the range currently stands today, we would then need to stand down for most of next week to allow Minotaur 4 to launch next Friday evening. They have, they're somewhat new to the range, don't launch from here very often, so they are using a lot of Eastern Range resources next week. So should they stay on track, we would not have a launch opportunity next week. We would come in behind them the next weekend, or likely early the week of the 28th of August for our next attempt. However, as is usual, if we weren't able to get off on Friday or Saturday, we would certainly petition the Eastern Range. Are there any other opportunities? How are your other customers doing? Would they be able to accommodate a third attempt for us on Sunday, possibly staying down on Sunday? So a lot of that type of negotiation takes place in the event of multiple scrubs.
If I could just add to that, so the Atlas vehicle has a 97% demonstrated ability to get off on the first attempt once we've gotten to this point. So while it's possible we may have to do what Tim just said, we think the probabilities are very good that we'll get off in the 2 days we have.
Okay, first let me start with the customers that do use the tracking and data relay satellite system. We are talking about a number of these customers. They vary from a human space flight to science missions. Anything that requires low latency because of the ability of TDRS to relay in near real time the data back to Earth. So again, the main beneficiary is the human space flight, the contact with the space station, the astronaut, the video conferencing that take place, and the regular communications taking place with the International Space Station, with the astronaut, as well as the scientific experiments that being conducted there. The TDRS provides 2 types of services. One is single access and the other multiple access. The single access allows us to go up in data rate to the 300, and now we are testing and implementing a 600 megabit per second, and in a couple of years we'll have 1.2 gigabit per second. And we are evolving the capabilities as the requirements are evolving. And we also have a multiple access. Multiple access allows us to provide, to stay in contact with our science mission, like a 911 call if the mission has any issue or problem, needs to do something. So it sends a message back to the Mission Control Center to get that kind of service done. So it's low data rate. In addition to that, we do support other science missions like the Hubble, all of the beautiful images that you are getting from deep space, where all of the galaxies that we are discovering and we are seeing is brought to you thanks to TDRS. Now going into, and TDRS is a concept that evolved during the 1970s. The technology relied on whatever was there in the 80s and the 90s and so on. It architecturally did not evolve that much. In the meantime, So it did not benefit from advances in technology. In the meantime, NASA, as well as other government agencies, have been working on evolving the technology. So we got into laser communications. Optical communication demonstrated great potential on the ground. Long haul communication now, every home now is kind of serviced via optical fibers on the ground. So the same concept we are taking to space, the ability to have much larger bandwidths to support much higher data rate for the same weight and volume and power requirements. So the optical communication does reduce the burden on the user. It gives you, an equivalent of up to 2 order magnitude in performance for the same volume and power and mass requirements. So that's where we are going. We've demonstrated the technology. Recently, a few years back, actually, 5 years ago, 4 and some, to be precise, we flew a mission to the moon called LADEE. And on that LADEE, we had a laser demonstration. We were able to transmit a signal from the moon to Earth at 622 megabit per second from the moon to here, with limited capability, small aperture on the ground as well as in space. So the technology now we continue to evolve it. We have the second generation optical laser capabilities that will be deploying in the next generation data relay and satellite. The beauty about laser communication, the laser beam is pretty thin, pretty small, pixel, thin. So it provides some level of security. On top of that, we are working on quantum entanglement and quantum key distribution to allow us even maximum security. Beyond the security aspect, you are talking about, and the large bandwidths, you are talking about the fact that laser communication and optical communication operating in a wavelengths that's not regulated by regulatory agencies. Presently, we have a problem if you are to go from government to non-government, near Earth to deep space. You have to use different spectrum. So a spacecraft that needs to go from one place to the other will need to have multiple payloads. And by having so many payloads on board, you are taking room and space that could be occupied by other scientific instruments. You could be collecting more science. Now, laser comm can replace all of this. It will allow you to cross across all of these boundaries without any problem, and will allow you to broadcast to Earth, because the wavelengths that we've selected is pretty healthy and safe to the human eye. So we don't expect much of a problem transmitting directly to Earth or transmitting to another dedicated ground terminal or to go through a data relay satellite. So we are going for maximum flexibility in the future, allowing our users to have always an optimum way to get to their destination. And so we are working, along with that, we are working a cognitive technology that will do the adaptive routing process based on a priori knowledge of the behavior of the network, the state of health of the individual channels, and it's supported by a more flexible, more robust data communication protocol. We are going from the TCP/IP to something we call disruption-tolerant networking. So that will allow us to an automated way to store and forward. So if you add the cognitive processes, you will do it in a smart way, in a more optimized way. So we have developed the standards. We are working within CCSDS, which is the Consultative Committee for Data Standards. It's an international organization to produce the kind of standards that will allow international interoperability. We are working with the commercial sector to infuse them into this organization and to work together to ensure that future standards are compatible such that we can interoperate. Because NASA's optimum goal is to push the technology to enable the commercial sector such that these services can be provided by commercial providers, and NASA will not need in the future to build these kind of capabilities. They can become a user like any other user, and we can focus primarily on advancing the future technology. We will be going after quantum communication in the near time frame, so we'd like to get there, and it's going to take all of us working together.
Thank you. That's all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and you can find additional information at nasa.gov/TDRS. That's TDRS.